Okay, welcome everyone to our lesson on labor economics. In today's lesson, we are going to look at labor unions. By the end of this lesson, you will understand how labor unions continue to shape the dynamics between workers and employers and actually how they influence labor markets. So labor unions are associations or organizations of workers which are formed to protect and improve the employment conditions of their members. Labor unions engage in what we call collective bargaining. That is, they represent workers in negotiations with employers over wages, working conditions, and other employment-related issues. And so the basic premise of the formation of labor unions is that they represent the interests of their members. And so some examples of labor unions in Ghana include the Trade Union Congress, the Ghana Registered Nurses and Midwives Association. We have the Ghana National Association of Teachers, General Agricultural Workers Union, National Association of Graduate Teachers, and then there are so many more labor unions in Ghana. And so we want to trace labor unions to its roots, its historical roots, and we can trace such roots to the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th centuries. And so it was during this time that there was a transition from agrarian production, okay, those who were mainly into agricultural production. There was a transition from that into mechanized production. So we had a boom in technological advancement. This is the period where especially women also had the privilege of competing with men for some of the jobs. We had the establishment of many factories and so many things like that. So we had so many industries that were actually created as a result of this industrial revolution. And so it was during this period we had significant changes in working conditions. We had workers who were working longer working hours. Employers were also taking advantage of the fact that there was too much labor supply in the system. And so they were paying them low wages. And then we even had a lot of people working in factories where they did not even have the protective gears or the equipment that are needed to keep themselves safe in the various factories where machines and technology was actually being used there. And so with these significant changes in working conditions, it necessitated a collective action that led to the formation of labor unions who can fight for the interests of these workers and ensure that they all have fair compensation or fair wages. So when we consider the classification of labor unions, we can consider the following types. The first one is the craft unions. And these are organization of workers, labor unions, okay, where we have workers with specific skills or craft, such as carpenters, plumbers, electricians, and what have you. We also have industrial unions where we are looking at workers from various trades within a particular industry. So we could have those who are coming from the automobile workers, okay, or the automobile industry. We can look at those who are coming from the mining industry. So these workers come together to form what we call industrial labor unions. We also have those who are working in the public sector, such as teachers, government workers, nurses, doctors, and many others that we have in the public sector. So they also come under the public sector unions. Now, if we try to consider the roles of labor unions, then we can talk about collective bargaining. This is one of the basic premises of the formation of labor unions. That is, labor unions actually use this opportunity to negotiate with employers in order to ensure fair wages and benefits and improve working conditions for their members. And then another one too is training and skill development. We have instances where labor unions can actually organize training programs and apprenticeships that actually equip their members with maybe contemporary skills and then also enhances their capabilities for employment. So we have labor unions organizing such training programs to update the skills of their members. We can also look at worker protection. So primarily, labor unions exist to actually ensure that workers' rights are protected and then their safety are also ensured. And then we also have political advocacy where labor unions can engage in political activities to influence legislation and public policies that seek to improve the interests of workers. So we do have advantages to the existence of labor unions, and one of them is collective bargaining power. So labor unions have that collective bargaining power in order to negotiate with the government or employers for better wages and improved working conditions of their members. Another one too is job security. So we have instances where labor unions actually provide that shield for workers, such that employers cannot indiscriminately lay off workers just anyhow. All right. And even if there is a situation where workers are laid off, you notice that some of them are actually giving fair compensation for the fact that they are being laid off. So we have all such things that are actually put in place. And so workers have that great protection against unfair labor practices. Another one too is improved compensation. Labor unions also try their possible best to ensure that their members, who are the workers, actually receive higher wages and also get better benefits and fair compensation. And then we also have democracy in the workplace. So this is where labor unions actually give the opportunity to workers to also express their concerns and channel their grievances through them to employers. And so they become part of the decision-making process, and they're able to actually voice out their concerns on what they need to become better off in the working place. Once we have advantages of the existence of labor unions, yes, of course, we would also have disadvantages. So let's look at some of these disadvantages of labor unions. So the first one we should look at is conflict. So this can occur when, for instance, there are disagreements between labor unions and employers. Just like getting to the last part of 2022, here in Ghana, we noticed that the National Association of Graduate Teachers actually went on strike because of government's refusal to incorporate them into the single spine salary structure, which was due them during former President Kufuor's administration when the single spine salary structure was actually introduced. So you notice that there arose some kind of conflict between the Employment Association and that of the labor union, the NAGRAT. And so because they did not get to form a consensus as to how to approach this issue, NAGRAT actually embarked on a strike for about 2 months, which actually disrupted the economy in terms of its education progress. So you can see that clearly we do have academic semesters being disrupted. So in the University of Education, Winneba, which I know of, the first semester usually begins in September. But due to the strike and also the adverse effect of COVID-19 on the economy, we've seen right now that the first semester actually begins in January or February of every academic year. So we have seen some disruptions in the economy, and some of these things actually do occur. So conflict is a disadvantage of labor unions. Yes, we also have costs imposed on workers. We have instances where if you have to be a part of a labor union, of course, you would have to pay what we call union dues. And so with the tendency for labor unions to actually fight for your rights and also receive higher wages and all those sort of things, yes, we do have some union dues that you need to pay. And that can also be a financial burden on workers. At the end of the day, when you pay, then you're also well represented. And the more effective your representation in labor unions are, then the more dues you're also likely to pay. So that is also a disadvantage of the existence of labor unions. It is not free to be a part of a labor union. Again, we also have political interference as a disadvantage of labor unions. Yes, there are instances where leadership of labor unions may actually have some sort of political affiliations to existing governments, and such that members' grievances and concerns may not be properly channeled, or negotiations may not be favorable to workers. And I do understand the fact that the National Association of Graduate Teachers, for instance, when they met with the government on their inclusion into the single spine salary structure, there was that sort of disagreement actually between the workers and the leadership of the unions. And I am not attributing this to any sort of political affiliation, but I'm trying to stress on the fact that if the leadership of labor unions have that sort of political affiliations, they owe some sort of allegiance to the government, that whenever they meet with the government to actually voice out the concerns of their members, members do not really get satisfied with the way such issues were addressed. So political interference is also a very huge issue in labor unions. And so at this point, thank you very much, and I will take your questions.